Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. Today we're going to talk about math in Final Fantasy IX, and I am excited, if you could not tell. So, here's the thing about Final Fantasy IX, just to start. Final Fantasy IX is one of those games where you hear a million great things about it. And even with all those things, you gotta wonder, hey, this game, if it ends up being good, is it as good as people say? And then you play it. And then you like play it, and then you like keep on playing it, and you realize something throughout the course of that. Not only is it as good as people say, it is somehow better. Somehow people undersold it, even though they were talking about how epic and awesome it is. It is nothing on them. It's just like words don't do it justice. So, if you could not tell, not only am I excited to talk about Final Fantasy IX today, I'm also a huge fan of it. It ranks really high up there for Final Fantasy games for me. Like, for me, it's like, God, there's so many great ones, but in terms of consistency, Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy VII, and Final Fantasy IX have been like in that top three. And just so we're clear with Final Fantasy VII, it's just like all of it pretty much. I'm rolling that together because it's like insane. But yeah, even before all that stuff though, before I got to all the other Final Fantasy games, like Final Fantasy VII was the one that really like cemented Final Fantasy is a regular force in my life. And so many great ones have come. And 7 remains high up there, 6 remains high up there, and 9 remains high up there. Okay, so I am digressing hard and I don't regret it. So, yeah, I'm going to talk about how math is used in Final Fantasy IX and talk about my opinion on the story in the game and all that. Assume that there are going to be spoilers ahead. I'm going full force, holding nothing back. So if you're with it, you're with it. If you're not, that's fair. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so when it comes to Final Fantasy IX, right, it has the same big thing that a lot of other Final Fantasy games have, and a lot of RPG games have, and really a lot of games. It's the idea that you are dishing out damage while trying to not take it, right? And just on that basic idea alone, you have something that's inherently mathematical. You are trying to either stay at 100% or get back up to 100% without getting to zero like percent for all of your characters, right? And meanwhile, you're trying to drag your opponents all down to 0%. You can think of it that way in terms of health. But then, that's the base level, right? It gets so much more crazier than that. Okay, so when it comes to Final Fantasy, I'll talk about like stats and like levels and experience. Then I'll branch out from there, and we'll just kind of roll with it and get to the points that we need to get to here. Okay, so you have that basic idea, right? You're dishing out damage while trying to not take it, or if you're going to take it, you're trying to minimize it or recover from it, or just like negate it. Okay, so right, you have that basic idea. Then you have your stats. You have your things like attack, defense, strength, magical attack, magical defense, things like spirit and like speed, and actually a whole lot of other stats. But let's just talk about the basics for a few to give you an idea of things. So these stats, they're something that like one like on their base level they're inherent to your characters and they grow as your characters grow, right? You're out there, you're winning battles, you're gaining experience points, you're leveling up, and your stats are getting boosted along the way. And then on top of that, your stats can be impacted by like equipment that you have, like your armor, your accessories, and there's ways to boost your stats, right? Like each character, and each of their classes, and we'll get to that. They have their own strengths, their own weaknesses as far as stats are concerned, and you can boost them, you can customize them, and we'll get to all that. But as far as what those stats do in battle, they determine how a lot of it goes, even if we can't always see it. Now, just to be clear, we see the effects of a lot of it, but there's still like a lot of behind the scenes math going on, just like there's a lot of on the surface math. Okay, and so like let's say you have your character and they have like their attack, right? Like they just have their base attack, right? That is growing over time. That impacts their strength, as does their level, right? And the idea is like with that strength is looking at your attack, is looking at your level, looking at your opponent, and calculations are being performed behind the scene to dish out damage. And like what you're seeing on the screen is the result of that when you're in battle. So you're seeing parts of what's happening, enough to get a big picture and figure out how you're going to do in combat. But there are things going on behind the scenes too. And what's really cool is a lot of it's just basic algebra, but like in a dope way. But you can argue that basic algebra is dope anyway. But that's a whole nother conversation, right? But my point is like it's just you don't have to get like crazy complex in order to make some interesting things, or you can take some things that are seemingly simple and you can build complex systems. So you have something like the stats where you have these different elements of the stats, right? And they impact the damage that you dish out and the damage that you take. And so you're adding layers onto this that basic notion of dishing out damage and trying to not take it, right? It starts to become more complex. And then you have something like I mentioned the speed stat, which affects your ATP. And the thing with your ATP is your ATP gauge is that in a lot of Final Fantasy games, at least for a certain window in time, you have the idea of the active time battle, um, and your ATP, and that idea is we had these turn-based games, but you build up to a certain degree and then you're able to attack, right? Like after a certain period of time. And things like your speed stat, if that's increasing, then all of a sudden that rate for you to attack goes down. And all of a sudden, you might have more opportunities to dish out damage as you're fighting your opponents. Um, so it's just like each and every stat, just on the fact that they're stats, is mathematical in nature, but they're doing something else along the way. And I think that's cool. So you have that idea, dishing out damage while trying to avoid taking it, and then you have stats in the mix, right? And then you have the idea that those stats can be boosted by equipment and by accessory, and they can also just be boosted by leveling up. And so you have this cool interplay of the things that make you win battles help you win more battles later on. And as you are growing, your characters are growing, right? And they're getting more abilities as the story advances, right? So are you through them. And so I think that's really cool in and of itself because you have like this mathematical empathy going on, this interactive empathy. You're leveling up as your characters do. You're growing as they're growing. You're progressing through the story as they're progressing through the story. They're having these intense moments, and you're right there with them. It is cool because like you're literally in their shoes. And so, okay, we talked about a lot of things with the comment, and we're gonna talk about some more things. Okay, so in a combat situation, right, is not typically going to be 101. In Final Fantasy IX, you can control up to 4 characters at a time. There's 8 characters, like 8 main characters that you can play throughout the game, with a few temporary ones. And they all have their strengths and their weaknesses, and that's where the idea of like jobs or classes come in. When it comes to like class systems or job systems throughout Final Fantasy games, they've been a part of it from the get go. It's the kind of thing where like some games they're more in your face about it, like then there's some that are like the idea is still there, but not as much as you think. Like, for instance, you might have a job or a class system, and you have things like warrior and white mage, black mage, dragoon, stuff like that, right? And it might be very open about that. But then you have other games like on Final Fantasy VII where the characters don't officially have like class systems stuff like that, but some are clearly filling certain roles to a degree, right? Because you have like someone like Cloud, for instance, to me, warrior, right? Tifa, monk, Aerith, like white mage. stuff like that. In any case, right? So you have that big, you have that idea of like job systems, class systems that have been a big part of Final Fantasy from the get go. Well, Final Fantasy IX, they made them more prominent again in that more open sense. And the idea is like with these jobs, with these classes, they have certain strengths and certain weaknesses, certain advantages, certain abilities. Right? They can use certain weapons, get certain stat boost. And that ends up being pretty cool and more dynamic for the gameplay because you could decide who you're going to take into battle, who's going to be more balanced. Because like maybe you want a thief on your team, maybe you want a knife on your team, maybe you want like one black mage and one white mage, maybe you want a dragoon in there somewhere, so you have to make a sacrifice and not take one of the other ones. Maybe you want a more balanced team in general throughout the game. Maybe you want to mix and match to your playstyle, and you can do that. And I think that's pretty cool. So you have the idea of the job and the class system, or whatever you want to call it, right? And on one level, you're like, oh, well, maybe it feels restrictive because I have to have, this character, that character, fill this role, that role. But you're still customizing a lot as you go. Like, one, you can customize them a bit, like, with their abilities, with different equipment and stuff like that. But just your formation. And there becomes so many different options, so many different ways that you can play, so many different ways that you can win a battle. And that's not all. So you have this idea, right, that you have your characters, right? They're getting experience, they're leveling up, they have their stats, they're dishing out damage while trying to avoid taking it. They have their different jobs or the different classes where they have their different strengths and their different weaknesses. But then you have things like the ATB gauge, and it's like, hey, well, you have that complex interplay where it's like it's not just turn based, although you can do wait is an option, but you don't have to, right? You can make it more dynamic. Um, it's interesting and it's cool either way, but it's just like that idea that the math is happening either way, but it's happening a little quicker than ATP. It keeps you on your toes. And so if you're playing it with that in mind, you have to be careful about your speed. And then you have things like the trance ability, right? And with the trance ability, it can do many things, but the idea is it's the limit break of Final Fantasy IX, right? Because you have limit breaks, desperation attacks, trance states, and so many other different names for it. But the idea is you're taking damage, or sometimes you're creating the opportunity for that trance state to get there. But if we're talking about in that broader sense, anyway, you're taking damage, or doing something to get into this state that allows you to dish out more damage on your end, dish out better support, or just have some new abilities, do different things, right? Because like in the case of the trance state, the way it works in like Final Fantasy IX, like for some characters, they're getting different stat boosts, right? They're able to dish out more damage. For some characters, they might get unique abilities, like with Vivi. He can dual cast like his black magic, or with Zidane. Um, it's like he can have some sort of ninja class sort of moves without that class being officially in the game, if I'm recalling it correctly. Um, but my point is like there's just so many different options, and so throughout all of this, right, like you're practicing a considerable amount of like resource management, right? Like because you have your characters, you have their HP, their MP, you have different items that could like boost their stats, dish out more damage to their part, dish out more damage to your opponent, help you recover, whether it be your health or from different status effects. So you're practicing resource management and using all of that, and also building up money and paying for different items and weapons and equipments throughout the game. And I'm matching status effects. There are status effects both positive and negative throughout the game. Negative ones, there's a lot of them, but some of them include like poison and or confusion, things like that, or petrify, slow and stop and all that good stuff. And all those are mathematical in nature, right? Because they're either like affecting your health directly, like poison, where it's like it's taking away your health bit by bit, or like if you're dealing with something like slow and stop, they affect your ATB gauge. Like slow effectively slows you down a bit, making it easier for your opponents to hit you and more frequently, and stop makes that worse, right? And um, so like damage is coming your way less directly than poison would be, but like the end result is the same. And so you're still playing that game of dishing out damage while trying to avoid taking it, but it gets complex, you know. And I think that's cool because if we're looking at everything, and there's just definitely stuff that I'm missing here, but it's like you have the basic idea, like I said, dishing out damage while trying to avoid taking it, and then you have uh, you know magic abilities that can heal you, that can dish out more damage, or you have different recovery items or different damage inducing items. You have the different class systems that and your stats and how all that is connecting to determine how each character is dishing out damage at any given moment throughout the game. You have all their different abilities, and those abilities can like grow as you go, because like in addition to getting experience points, you can get ability points, and increase your abilities. Like you can make them permanent throughout the course of that game, and just get some crazy stat boosts. And all the while you have things like the trance state as well. And I didn't mention like summons, but that's a big part of the game too. Like in Final Fantasy 9, it's like eidolons. They go by so many different names, like summons, eidolons, espers, icons, guardian forces, like you name it, right? But in Final Fantasy 9, they're eidolons, and like they do a variety of effects too, like dishing out damage and helping you recover, stuff like that. There's so many different ways to just mix and match, and watch out for this thing and that thing. And for status effects, I mentioned some of the negative ones, but there are positive ones too, like that we don't always think of as status effects, like protect, shell, regen, things like that, right? um and so many other ones too. But the idea is like, hey, you have this positive stat effect, and while it affects you, this thing is happening. Like protects, like, oh well, physical damage is being lessened. With shell, magical damage is being lessened. Reflect, it's like, oh well, magic is being reflected off of you, but you do have to be careful with reflect, because like if you're casting magic on yourself, well, that's still reflecting off of you. I don't know why I shot up like a basket there, but here we are. Okay, so this went in a lot of directions that I anticipated it to go, because that was the idea, but maybe some other directions that I didn't quite think, or maybe it went in a direction that I wanted it to go, but not necessarily in the way that I thought it would go. But I don't regret it, if that makes sense. I guess I'm thrown off by how long I was talking. Okay, so for the rest of the video though, I'm going to talk about like the story, how I feel about it, and the characters. Oh, I will also say, like, I focused on the gameplay, because there's like a lot of math on the surface and behind the scenes, but it's like it just doesn't end there, right? Like there's math in the characters, their designs, their colors, how light is used to portray not only the characters but the world, math in the sound, whether it be like the sound design as a whole and the sound effects that are used, or the music. Just music is crazy. It's awesome. It's Final Fantasy music. It was always going to be good. And there's math in not only it being good, but math in it itself. Math in the idea that it's sound, math in the idea that it's music and it's designed to make you feel. It's like there's math across the board, math in the program, and math in the budget, math in how the game was marketed, right? Like because the idea is like, right, you had Final Fantasy 9, Final Fantasy 10, and Final Fantasy 11 all coming out in a fairly short range of time when you look back on it, and just like premiered to the world, giving different things that Final Fantasy represents, the old, the new, and the unexpected of sorts. It's like, yeah, there was so much to it, and it's crazy because at the time of the recording, right, we're in 2025, and that makes Final Fantasy 9 25 this year. That's insane. Okay, so there's math across the board, and I can go on and on and on about that, and I tend to, but I did want to talk about how much I enjoy Final Fantasy 9. Final Fantasy 9 is one of those games where, okay, so like there was a lot of callbacks to earlier Final Fantasy. Some of that was like, the use of like the art style, the character designs, the class slash job system, whatever you want to call it. And there's a lot of other references too. Um, and Final Fantasy IX is just such an interesting game because it's like it looks light, but that's like a lot of Final Fantasy games, like especially early on, they might have this like light, colorful appeal, but they have like some of the darkest crap ever. And Final Fantasy IX, um, despite the characters and their appearance, despite all the bright colors, is one of the darkest things, but it's like in a meaningful way, I think, because like one of the big themes of the game is dealing with death, dealing with purpose, and that is something that I could relate to, something that a lot of people could relate to. Because all the characters in the game, well, a fair amount of the characters in the game, they're trying to figure out their purpose in a world that might have defined that purpose for them. And a lot of characters, both good and evil, have that commonality in them, right? Like they're dealing with their life, they're having something to do with existentialism. And I think that's cool. I think that's interesting. Because, see, for me, and again, like it's for a lot of other people, it's like I'm not immune to that sort of stuff either. Like we go through life and it's like, well, what's my purpose, right? And like, I mean, honestly, it's like you don't have to have a purpose. You're living, and that can sometimes be enough. But we often want more than that. And my thing at the end of the day is like, if we're not told our purpose, that's absolutely okay. We have agency. We can choose our purpose. There's strength in that. There's power in that. And that's how you kind of go from the bleak views of nihilism, where you're like, okay, well, nothing matters, and you kind of graduate into existentialism, where you're like, well, okay, maybe this or that doesn't have inherent matter, or maybe someone designed me for this purpose or that purpose, or maybe I feel like I'm put here for this purpose or that purpose, but I can choose my own. And I think like Final Fantasy IX covers a lot of that well, and I think while a lot of characters end up getting there, if they were struggling with that, Vivi has, I think, like the best outlook, but on everything by the end. He's a black mage, designed to be a weapon, designed to have a short lifespan, and he knows it. And it's not like he's immune to thinking about it, but he ends up finding a way to make life matter on his terms. And I like that. And like Vivi is one of my favorite characters in that game. The only other game, sorry, the only other character to like tie with Vivi, if not maybe surpass him a little bit, is Beatrice, because Beatrice is a badass. Beatrice is awesome. If I have one major criticism of Final Fantasy IX, outside of the fact that you don't get like the experience points in the boss fights, which pisses me off. You still get something out of them, but it's like I want the experience too. If there's one criticism outside of that I give to Final Fantasy IX, it's like not enough Beatrice. All right, not enough. But yeah, so there's some great characters, some really truly great characters, like with a lot of emotion, and like Kuja is out of his mind, like one of the craziest Final Fantasy villains, and that does not get talked about enough. And then like at the end, there's an unexpected fight, and if you played it, you know what that is. It's like it fits weirdly nice with that idea of confronting death, and choosing to live. Yeah, so it's like for me, Final Fantasy IX is a game where it has like characters that have depth, that are dealing with some very relatable problems in like a really crazy world, and they're forced time and time again to watch like horrendous acts and still find some strength to live. And I dig that. I also dig the gameplay. I dig the story. I dig it all. It is like one of those games that it lives up to the hype and then some. So yeah, if you stuck around, thank you for sticking around. If you haven't played Final Fantasy IX, you should play Final Fantasy IX. If you have played Final Fantasy IX, you should play it again. I'll see you in the next one.